Oh, definitely can hear me now. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the sixth installment of the OpenNX conference, OpenNX 2019. My name is Marco Morales. I'll be here sort of shepherding the proceedings for the morning. But first, what I want to do is introduce Dr. Vince Kellen, who's the Chief Information Officer for the University of California, San Diego, as well as a member of the Chancellor's Cabinet, Vice Chancellor, and a member of the Chief Financial Officer's Senior Management Team. So give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for coming to San Diego. We're glad to host you here. So you're seeing a fairly typical day in the late, winter, early spring. Well, it's kind of like the middle of the summer, kind of like the fall. But it brings back memories of a trip that I had in London years ago. I was there for 10 days flying between two other projects that I was working on. And it happened to be in the middle of the summer, and it was absolutely wonderful weather in London. Sunny as could be, not a cloud in the sky. Wimbledon finished in record time. There were no rain delays whatsoever. The weathermen on the shows were getting a little bit exasperated, and towards the end of that run, they're saying, "Don't worry, Londoners, the weather will return to normal. Rain is coming. Don't worry, sun is coming," when you see the clouds out here. So again, welcome here to San Diego. You see a lot of construction going on, obviously, here in San Diego, as in much of California. Things are, from an education standpoint, proceeding with the pace. And like many other universities, we're trying to focus hard on how to take advantage of digital technology, online learning, distance learning at a distance, etc. So we're glad and delighted to be hosting here. So again, welcome, and hope you have a great rest of the day today and tomorrow as you go through the rest of the conference. So at this point, I'd like to introduce the CEO of edX, and you guys probably know him, fantastic gentleman, force of nature, Anant Agarwal. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince, and thank you, UC San Diego, for hosting us. And you guys have been just absolutely fantastic hosts. Before I talk about the future learner, let me give you a quick update on where we are and our strategy, and then talk about why we are doing all of this in the first place. So again, let me start by thanking our hosts, UC San Diego. And due to your efforts and the efforts of this community, I believe this is the largest Open edX ever. So let's give all of yourselves and UC San Diego a big hand. So first, some quick stats in terms of an update. Again, through your efforts, the edX platform is getting bigger and reaching more places around the world. There's 25,000 courses on the Open edX platform around the world, including edX and many of the other platforms. 2,400 instances of the platform, and collectively 45 million learners. And so 20 million of them are on edX, 25 million of them on Open edX instances. And I can promise you that that number is, I think, much smaller than it really is. And one of these days we'll find a way of measuring the true reach and impact. A lot of people ask me, what is edX's strategy going ahead? What are you focused on? So let me give you just some quick insights into how we are thinking, so that as you make your own plans and build your own directions, you can see where our thinking and thrust is going to be. So there's three lines of business, if you will, that are very important to edX. One is our B2C business, where as a platform, millions of learners from all over the world come in and take the courses. They find these through search and other means. That's our B2C business. And as part of that, we have a number of credentials. The MicroMasters credential is one example. We are totally behind it. It's a very important credential, and it is something that we are working towards really establishing as a very recognized credential by employers and learners all over the world. Professional certificates and individual courses are also programs that we have on edX. The second line of business is B2B, and that is edX for Business, where we work with, we directly sell into enterprises, where they can have their employees come in and take the courses en masse on the edX platform, for example. And so here, a lot of our development and thinking goes into what are the needs of enterprises, not just in the content sense, but also from a platform standpoint. So this is another a second important line of business for us. And third, we piloted a online degree program with Georgia Tech starting about 2.25 years ago. And we formally entered this business in a big way last year. About, I would say, around summer of last year, we launched 10 online, fully online master's degrees. And in doing so, we launched this third line of business. I know that over the years, I've talked to many of you, where many of you are already hosting online degrees yourselves. And so here, edX is doing that now. And what that means is that there's going to be a continued and increased focus on the kinds of rich, engaging experiences, the ability to deliver engaging content, rigorous content, and also more and more of a thrust as we go ahead into the future about how this integrates into the needs of campuses, for example. So that's a third thrust. In doing so, we're doing it a bit differently from many of the other OPMs. OPMs are platforms that work with universities. These are program management, online program management companies that work with universities to launch their programs. In our case, we've kind of created a new category called Lean OPM, where a lot of the capacity is built by the universities, and edX does a smaller piece of the whole soup to nuts of doing master's degrees and taking care of students. And in return, the universities maintain more control. It's much more capacity building for them. And also, the revenue share is much more in their favor compared to some of the other, generally, to my knowledge, edX is the only nonprofit OPM in the market today. Okay. Even as we launch these three lines of businesses, there's a lot of connection between these lines of businesses and a lot of innovation, innovation that we continue to foster. I just want to highlight one example innovation. At various points in time, you've heard me talk about stacking credentials and so on. And one of the more radical things that's happening today is the stacked masters in supply chain management that Arizona State launched. So there, the students would complete a MicroMasters in supply chain management, and that's one piece. And then, if they want to, they would continue on following an applications process into an online master's in supply chain management from ASU's business school and completely on edX. So you can see the stacking happening here, and also multi-institutional stacking that is happening. So it's a very exciting innovation, and I just wanted to highlight some of the connections between the multiple lines of businesses. In all of this, you all play an extremely important part. We want to build the world's best learning platform. With 45 million learners, it's arguably the world's biggest learning platform today. But together, we also want to build the most engaging and the best learning platform around the world. And in doing so, the Open edX community is very important. We want to get your contributions. We want to get the community contributions. At the same time, we also want to create much better engagement and collaboration within the community. And of course, edX is also part of the community. And so both, which is community contributions and also collaborations within the community. So this is extremely, extremely important for us. So with that, let me talk about why we are doing all of this to begin with. And oftentimes we spend a lot of time thinking about the platform and the metrics and content and the supply side of things. But sometimes it's worthwhile pausing to see who is the learner. Why are we doing this? And so in the rest of the presentation, let me talk about who we are seeing as the future learner. Okay, who is the future learner? What are they looking for? And let me promise you, they're not the learners they're not the same kind of learners as, for example, I was when I went to college or finished high school, 40 years ago. So the learners have many characteristics, and so let's start with the first one. The first category are learners that are looking to upskill. Okay, they're in a job, and they want to stay relevant, and they want to upskill. And so just to give you an example of why upskilling is so important, edX conducted a survey, and one of the interesting results was that 53% of the respondents, and not just edX learners, this was a broad survey across the United States, 53% of the learners, not just learners, but 53% of the survey respondents indicated that they used 50% or less of their education in their jobs. And 15% of them said that they were using none of their education in their current jobs. And so this means that people have to keep on upskilling and are looking for new skills as they go along. And so many of your sites cater to this kind of learner. So as one example, here's Yvonne. And Yvonne is at FUN. This is France Université Numérique, an Open edX platform to upskill herself in her current role. So just many examples of this around the world. Another one is Harambe, which is a youth employment accelerator. And there again, they focus very much on enabling people to upskill in newer technologies, sustainable technologies, and so on. The second class of learner is multidisciplinary. Okay, when I was growing up, certainly you joined a discipline and you got a degree in a discipline. But today, learners are looking for both hard skills and soft skills. Technical skills and soft skills, a real mix of skills. And a Burning Glass report has indicated that they survey employers, employment postings and so on, and they're finding that one of every 3 skills requested by employers is a soft skill in their job postings. The other interesting data that the edX data science team produced for me was that 70% so if you look at learners who've taken several courses on edX, I believe the number was around 5 or more, 70% of learners enroll in a mix of STEM and non-STEM courses. So it's not that people are just learning Python, advanced Python, programming, or analytics and so on, but really taking a mix of both STEM courses and non-STEM courses, languages and computer science, or analytics and humanities courses. So this is very, very common as well. So here's an example. So the ALU, for example, is again a website institution based in Africa using Open edX, and they talk about enabling learners to become future-proof. And a big part of their message and the learning they provide is both combination of technical skills and also what they call future-proof skills that think of it as soft skills, critical thinking, and other kinds of skills that robots are less likely to take away in the near future. So, again, very important, the mix of people looking for multidisciplinary skills, both hard skills and soft skills. The next learner is, we might call them fluid, where they want to commingle learning and working at the same time. They're working and they're learning at the same time. So Harleen is one example. She was at Microsoft in India, and even while she was there, she completed the professional program in data science while she was working at Microsoft. And the results are pretty clear. We did a survey of learners who earned certificates with MicroMasters programs and with professional certificate programs. And as an example, 91% of them who completed MicroMasters programs, they indicated that they already had a career advancement because of it. It could be a pay raise, it could be a new job, it could be a promotion. And so people are working and earning new credentials at the same time. So one example site is the cognitive class.ai. It's an open edX site of IBM's. And they are, again, catering to employees and others that want to upskill while they work. The next category of learner is one I might call connected. And these learners are both very, very plugged into their societies and communities and the normal life, and they want to be learning new things at the same time. So Andrew is one example. He completed RIT's project management professional certificate program. And in his case, he's living life, and while he's living, he wanted to upskill and while he's doing his normal things. I quite like the quote about whenever he found time as part of his life to do learning, he would learn. And we will see this more and more in the future as people want to learn while they have a bouncing a baby on their lap or something, with a learning at the same time. Another example is Moore, who's a learner on campus.il. This is the Israeli national platform using open edX. And another example of a learner that wants to learn whenever they can. Again, connecting a connected learner where they're living life and they want to be learning at the same time. One category of learner is transformational, where the future of work is not going to be the same as what we've had in the past, and they want to completely transform themselves and pick new careers and new fields. And in fact, in a survey that we did, we found that 1/3 of Americans, this is a US survey, 1/3 of Americans have completely changed fields since starting their first job. Okay, 1/3. And so these are learners that want to transform themselves. And here's one example of such a learner. So Mandela is a nurse from Ghana. He completed the MicroMasters program in leadership from University of Queensland. And then he went on, he changed careers and went on to work for a Canadian NGO. I happened to be at UQ in Brisbane a few weeks ago, and actually turned out that after he finished that, he's now on campus wanting to complete a master's degree, actually. So he really, it's an example of a learner that is, truly transformed themselves from what they were doing to a whole new career. Sam's another example. A BA in English. He took CS50 from Harvard, the computer science, one of the very popular CS courses on edX. And from working in a bookstore, he began to work in software development. Again, learners that are looking to completely transform their careers. So with that, again, let me leave you with this last vignette. The future learner is looking to upskill. They want to stay relevant. They are multidisciplinary, combine hard skills and soft skills. They are fluid. They want to connect. They want to learn while they work. They are connected. They want to learn while they live. Their normal life. Learning has to fold into life and become lifelong learners. And then there's the transformational learner that's looking to completely transform themselves and potentially change fields completely. So with that, let me stop. And I think there might be time for a question or two. Adam is nodding. Okay, so we have time for a few questions. So, who wants to go for the first question? Thank you.
Any questions? You just nailed it, no questions?
Tim, go ahead.
Anant, that was a great talk. You indicated 3 general areas for edX at the beginning. What do you see as the balance? Are they going to stay in roughly equal proportion, or is the B2B going to really expand, or the B2? I mean, from where I'm sitting, I would expect the B2C to dominate, but I'd be interested in your notion of a few years on how those 3 broad areas are going to develop.
So, the question is, of the 3 strategic thrusts, B2C, B2B, and the lean OPM for degrees, how does edX see the balance between the 3? And you can look at many metrics. You can look at how many learners among the 3. You can look at revenues. So in terms of revenues today, B2C is certainly, way ahead, and B2B and the masters are just burgeoning categories. But there is multi 100% growth in the latter 2, both B2B and online master's degrees. So they will grow. If you ask me to guess, where will we be in, say, 3 to 5 years? I would say, from a revenue standpoint, all 3 will be equally important. If you were to ask me to guess, I don't know, 40, 40, 20, 30, 30, 30, somewhere there. In terms of strategy for edX and in terms of what's important, I think the key is that there's connections among all of them. There's a lot of synergy between all of them, and which is why I purposefully provided the example of the stackability, where the B2C, where the same content, the same platform is used to support micromasters programs and the stack up for master's degrees. The development we do for, say, making courses and so on more engaging and so on for master's degrees or for more rigorous courses are also going to help micromasters programs, which are B2C. So really, there's a lot of cross-pollination among the 3. So again, at this point, I cannot say what's going to be most important down the road. My gut is that way down into the future, I think the modular micro-credentials, I believe, will, if we can establish them as a critical brand, I believe that the modular credentials will ultimately hold sway. And my gut is that the more traditional degrees, the future learner, if you looked at the future learner, it's incredibly hard for some of these future learners to spend 1 or 2 years getting a full degree. So again, it's a sort of a waffly answer, but I think assume a third for now. Yes? Oh, okay. We'll go with Mo, and then we'll go. We'll go with Mo, and then we'll come to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Anant, for a great explanation, and also how eloquently you broke into these 5 different categories. My question is, of course, in most cases, for most individuals, it's not going to be in one category. It's going to be some combination. Do you see any particular age, based on people's age, based on geographic area, based on their professions or whatever, that some areas might be more of an emphasis than the others?
The question is, how does age correlate with where the learners are? Frankly, I think all of these learners are, I would say, more in the lifelong learning category and reflect edX learners today, for example, where the median age of learners is 26, 27, 28, depending on the kind of program you're looking at. And so I would say that many of these are for sort of the lifelong learning, where people want to continue learning even after they have, while they're in college or after they've finished college. But among the ages, I think learning while you work, learning while you want to stay connected with your life, I think that's going to be true for everybody. I think transformational, my sense is, it could be at any age. So I would say it's hard for me to pinpoint any given age threshold for any of them. So I think it'll be true for learners of any age. Yes.
Hi. In 2010, I started a MOOC with the purpose of reducing the cost of college. So over 900 courses, 200 of the courses align themselves with credit by examination, APs, CLEPs, DSSTs, NYUs, and all the others. So currently, you can get your bachelor's in over 60 majors from several state universities regionally accredited, like MIT, but not MIT. in 6 months or longer, self-paced, for under $8,000 books and college fees. With this type of thing happening throughout the whole MOOC system, do you see the disruption of degrees themselves instead of micromasters?
Absolutely. I see. I totally see transformation of degrees as well, where it's incredibly clear as we conducted surveys and so on. The transformational learner, for instance, they're not going to go and get a new degree. They want to upskill and reskill with modular chunks as they go along. So I think there's transformation happening to degrees simply because of how people are looking to learn in the future, and certainly because of online learning. I think there's a real potential for transforming the undergraduate space as well. I think few people would argue that our system today is perfect. Okay, education system is clearly broken. That doesn't make any sense where you have $1.5 trillion, in student debt, where getting a bachelor's degree from a good college, costs you room and board costs you $250,000, and then you go get a $40,000 job. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I believe that the work that you're all doing, digital learning and so on, I'm absolutely confident that it is going to transform the undergraduate space as well through modular credentials that stack up, where multiple institutions participate and collaborate. I think it is going to happen.
I have the microphone. Hi.
Okay, go ahead.
I wonder if you see any type of significant distinction between professional type content compared to academic type content, such as might result in a master's degree versus a professional certificate, and if that has any implications for modularity and stackability.
A great question. Absolutely, there's quite a bit of difference between kind of the academic courses and what you might call professional or exec ed. I mean, I see a clear categorization. There are courses that are introductory courses more at the late high school or undergraduate level, and then there are more advanced courses that might, an academic in rigor and so on, like the MicroMasters programs with credit pathways. There's professional certificate programs that tend to be much shorter, but people are looking to get a quick skill. So let's say I already know C programming, and I want to go and learn Python, for example. Then getting a professional certificate in Python programming, for example, would make sense. So when you're looking for a quick skill, a professional certificate is good. And then we're seeing another important category, which is some topic for execs or for business. Now, those are very popular. So for example, we have a program from Columbia University, Data Science for Executives, where executives are looking not to understand how to go and do detailed programming, but of analytics and so on, but more what are the business implications of data science? How should I think about these things? And so there's very, very different kinds of courses, and they also have to be very short. So I think there's a clear, from a market standpoint, I think when you design courses, it's very important to think of who your customer is. The same course is not going to be taken by an executive, not going to be taken by a professional looking for a skill, not going to be taken by an undergraduate student or by a high schooler. I think you really have to think about your audience. And I think professional certificate programs, MicroMasters programs clearly enable that kind of differentiation in terms of the audience you are seeking. So I think I'm getting a strong signal. So let me stop here and not overstay my welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anant. So next up, we're going to have two updates. So the state of the OpenEdX community and the state of the OpenEdX ecosystem. So we'll invite up Ned Batchelder.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ned Batchelder. I know about half of the people in this room. I'm hoping to meet the rest of you over the next few days. I've been on the OpenEdX team since its inception 6 years ago. It's incredibly inspiring to me that we can have a collaborative sharing community where we can fulfill more than half of edX's corporate mission of providing high-quality education to everyone everywhere. So thank you all for helping with that. Thanks a lot. I've got a few updates for the conference itself, some logistical details. If you're going to tweet, we've got a conference hashtag of #OpenEdX 2019. There is a Slack channel. So the OpenEdX Slack is open for all sorts of collaboration and has been for a long time, but there's a conference-specific channel in the Slack. And there are a few OpenEdX 2019 subrooms there if you want to split off the where are we going to eat from the how do I do DevStack stuff or whatever it is. Some additional details. So there's a lot of structured content in your program. We're going to be doing birds of a feather or open spaces, whatever you want to call it, during the coffee breaks. There'll be a paper sign-up near registration where you can look and see what topics are being discussed and where they're being discussed near the registration area, or put up your own. I'm also hoping that during lunch, maybe we'll get some clumping together of tables. We're going to be eating right here, but you don't have to sit exactly with the people you happen to sit with right now. You can find other people across the room. Maybe there'll be instructional designers over there and DevStack over here or something like that. And lastly, there's a reception tonight at the aquarium. Buses will be leaving from the registration, near the registration area, starting at 5:30, going for about 45 minutes. So you'll want to be there to get on a bus to get to the aquarium. And then there will be buses going back to both the Hyatt and the Sheraton hotels after the reception. If you're going to a destination other than that, you'll Uber from there or something like that. Okay, those are logistical details. Since Montreal, where we were 10 months ago at the last conference, we've had a new release of OpenEdX, the 9th release, Ironwood. It represents 7 months of work, so there are a ton of features that I'm not going to go through right now, don't worry. If you're interested in more details about this, the edX product team is doing a product roadmap session this afternoon. In the SCED entry for that event, there is a link to a survey if you want to ask a question of the team. I'd like to thank Jill Vogel, Braden McDonald, Usman Khalid, and their team for doing a bunch of amazing contributions. We collaboratively are building the best online learning platform. They've done some great work with public course content, with Blockstore, which is an upcoming implementation of the data storage that you'll be hearing more about, and with converting XBlocks to XModules. Their team from OpenCraft has been doing a lot of great contributions. I'd also like to thank Omar Ithawi from AppSembler for doing some, frankly, unglamorous work, converting code from the old way of doing things to a new way of doing things. Since Montreal, we've had 262 merged pull requests from the community, from 87 different contributors, which are great numbers. We've got a project called Inker for doing small, bite-sized work, and that's given us a huge bump in contributors. In particular, 2 contributors, Christian Klaus and Loic Dockery, have themselves done almost 40 pull requests since the first of the year. And since I'm an engineer, I'm going to give you some graphs. You can see the bump in February, the huge number of merged pull requests. And the contributions by category shows you that Inker is the biggest category. We're really hoping to take some of the learnings from that project and apply it to other types of contributions in the coming year. And I'm hoping we'll have your help doing it. All right. Last thing, I'm an engineer. We started OpenEdX focusing on code contributions, but we're very, very interested in other types of contributions. We have educators, researchers, and technologists. Just yesterday at the tutorials, we had an instructional design summit, which was standing room only, not talking about code, talking about how to design courses, how to teach people, how to reach learners. That's an important kind of collaboration too, and we're hoping to grow that as well. So I'm interested to talk to you about that. There are lots of non-technical people here, or sort of non-coders here, I should say. So there's a lot of interesting things to share. Okay, that's all I've got. To talk more about the future of the ecosystem, I'm going to call up the Chief Operating Officer of edX, Adam Medros.
All right. Thank you, Ned. Welcome, everyone. It's really great to see this room full of people who care deeply about education, care about open source, and care about the edX platform and the Open edX platform. So I'm going to very briefly talk a little bit about where we are with the Open edX platform and how we're thinking about it, and preview for some of you some of the other great topics that are going to get discussed over the next 2 days. First and foremost, from a mission standpoint, we, and by we I mean all of you in this room, are focused on collaboratively building the world's leading teaching and learning platform. This is important. I think the opportunity to leverage open source, to leverage the community, to build an incredible teaching and learning platform, the best teaching and learning platform, is an amazing opportunity. And it's one that I believe collectively we can experiment in ways, we can evolve in ways that just the edX team alone is not going to ever imagine or, quite frankly, be able to resource. When we look at what we're thinking about last year, if you recall, if you were here at the Open edX conference, we talked about 5 themes that were the focus for edX, the organization. One of those themes was architecture. And inside of the architecture theme, the focus internally this year has been about making our infrastructure, our architecture of the platform, more flexible for us to develop on, and ultimately for all of you to develop on, right? The speed of developing on a big monolithic platform, being able to experiment and try new things quickly, rapidly, was just not there. And I think we've made nice progress in the last year on really focusing on extensibility, on the ability for the team to be able to focus on this core. And quite frankly, the core, I think, is something that we don't expect to see a lot of community activity in, right? And that's not because we don't want it, it's because it shouldn't change that often. It should be somewhat sacred. It should be somewhat stable and solid and unchanging. But most importantly, we should be wrapping a layer of plugins and extensibility to the core that enables all of you to build and extend and experiment and try new things on the platform. There have been some great highlights in this last year of the community doing just that. And you're going to hear about a couple of these over the course of the conference the next few days. And so I'm not going to go deep into any one of these. One of these is Lab Exchange, being built through the support of Amgen, with Harvard University and with OpenCraft. This is a fundamental reimagining of how data and content is stored inside of the Open edX system. And I think that this is a big lift, and it's one that is core to the underlying platform. It's one that the edX team is working collaboratively with OpenCraft and Lab Exchange and Harvard to build. But it is a meaningful change in the underlying Open edX platform. A good example of a plugin and extension was announced, I believe, yesterday by UC San Diego. And is a Caliper integration. Caliper is a real-time streaming event system. This is something that we hear over and over again from partners on edX, and I'm sure all of you care deeply about, which is the ability to have real-time events interacting with your courses and with the functionality that you want to build into your courses to improve learner outcomes, to improve teaching and pedagogical methods. And last, let's not forget individual contributors that can build something meaningful. So Tutor is an example of an individual contributor building I'm gonna get the details of this wrong, but a one-click ability to run Open edX in a Docker environment, I think is, if I recall correctly. And so, again, a great example of an individual with an idea who can extend the platform in a way that's meaningful. Last but not least, IBM Cloud has built a self-managed hosting option where you can get a dedicated Open edX instance on an IBM Kubernetes cluster, basically with one click. IBM's a sponsor of the Open edX conference, and this is an incredible development for the community. So all of these are things that you can hear more about over the next few days. They're all great examples of how the community can extend the platform, and that our focus at edX is to make sure that that is easy to do and something that all of you can continue to invest in. It goes without saying, on Friday there's a developer summit. I hope many of you will attend, and a great opportunity to leave this conference and with a bunch of new ideas and a new work that all of you are doing to make the platform better. So again, thank you for being here. Excited that you're all going to dig in for the next few days and talk about how we continue to extend this incredible platform we're building. Thanks.
All right, so next up we have Candace Thille is the Director of Learning Science and Engineering at Amazon Inc. Candace focuses on applying the results from research in the science of learning into the design and evaluation of open web-based learning environments. Sounds related to what we're doing today. Candace was the founding director as well of Carnegie Mellon University's Open Learning Initiative, also relevant to what we're doing today. Join me in welcoming Candace.
Hi, everyone. I think I know a lot of people in this room, too. What I was going to talk about today is technology, the science of learning, and transformation. And I'm actually going to start where Anant left off. Because whenever I talk about this, I always want to start at the same place. Start with the learner. What do we know about the learner? Anant shared a lot of information about the learner. But since I study human learning, I actually look at the learner at a different level. I look at the diversity of the learner. And our learners that are using Open edX are incredibly diverse. They're diverse among all of the demographic forms of diversity that we think about. But really importantly, they're diverse as learners. They have diversity of background knowledge. They have a diversity of their relevant skills. They have a diversity of their future goals. And they have a diversity of the meaning they make out of the learning experiences we present them with. So now let's talk about the innovation. How does the technology help us better support the learner? So I talk with lots and lots of groups. And usually when I ask, what's the big power of this technology to transform education? I get one of three answers. Those are they. So I'm interested in what this room thinks. Okay? You've been working in this space a long time. So I'm going to make you vote. The three choices are access and convenience. Anant spoke a lot about access and convenience. The promise that we offer in Open edX is if you have a computer, you can learn anytime, anywhere. Big power, access, and convenience. There's also simulation. We can do really cool things with the computer that's hard to do in a place-based learning experience. If you're taking an engineering course, you could actually simulate building a bridge. People can drive across that bridge, the bridge collapses, nobody dies. Really authentic learning experience, low risk. Simulation. But then a lot of people say no. The real power in this decade is connection. That you're connected to a computer, but that computer is connected to an internet. So you can connect to other learners, you can connect to experts, you can connect to the world. Okay, so now I'm going to make you vote. I told you I would. So, and I want you to raise your hands because I don't think we have like poll everywhere or any clicker things, right? So we'll just do that. We'll do the old-fashioned way. How many people think, if you had to bet what the big power is for transforming education, how many of you would put your money on access and convenience? Raise your hands. Okay, look around. Okay, how many people think, yeah, access and convenience is important, but really it's about what the simulation capability that we can do with the computer, the kinds of learning experiences we can create that we just can't create in place-based learning. Simulation. Raise your hands high, come on. Okay, not so many of that. Okay, how many people think, yeah, those first two people are so 20th century? Like the real power of this century is connection. And the power of this technology is connection. Okay, great. So now, you might have noticed on the slide, I'm not only working at Amazon right now, I'm on leave from Stanford, where I am an associate professor in the Graduate School of Education. And you might be wondering, Candace, why are you giving us a crummy multiple choice question? Yeah, so how many of you wanted me to have up there all of the above? Would have voted for that? Okay, how many would have voted for none of the above? Okay, how many of you just don't raise your hands when you're asked to raise your hands? Okay, okay, that's great. So actually, if I were giving myself this assessment, all of the above is a good answer, but I would have picked none of the above. None of the above. The real power of this technology is what Amazon has figured out. It is what Google has figured out. It is what Netflix has figured out. The power of this technology is not using it to push it out to people, but to push it to the interface. Because in the interface, what can we do? We can observe the user. Now, Google, Netflix, Amazon are observing us as users all the time in the interface. Why? Why does anyone care? Why observe us interacting with those interfaces? Because by observing us interacting in the interface, we can know the user. And so you might think, oh, that's kind of creepy that you're talking about that with respect to learning. I'm not talking about knowing the user as a consumer. I am talking about knowing the user as a learner. Because if we know the learner better, then that individual learner, we can support them better to learn. If we know learners as a group better, then we can raise our whole understanding of human learning and support all learners better. So the power of the technology is basically designing the technology so that the learner interactions can be collected, modeled, and used to drive very powerful feedback loops to the various actors in the educational system. And those actors are, first and foremost, the learner. Using the learner's interactions to give them feedback to help support their learning. The other actors are teachers. So if I'm trying to teach a group of people something, if I can get insight into what they're understanding and not understanding, I can do a much better job of teaching them. Give insight to the learning designers so that the learning experience that I'm designing is better for the next group of learners. And finally, to the learning researchers. So I want to just tie this back to the edX mission. This is the edX mission. So to deliver a high-quality education to everyone, everywhere, what do we need to do? Well, we need to start with where the learner is, know what their current knowledge and capabilities are, and help them get to where they're trying to get to. That's all the micro-masters, micro-credentials, professional certificates that Anant was talking about, is really helping learners to get from where they are to where they're trying to get to, by giving them a series of learning experiences. So in order to do that, we have to kind of know where they're starting, where they're trying to get to, and what kind of learning experiences will help move them there. So how do we find this out? Especially when you're talking about learners, millions of learners that you're never going to see face to face. How do you find this out to support them?
Creepy
well, you could think of it as creepy statistics, that's true. But it is really about observing the learner, engaging with the learners. And then I guess I'd call it modeling. Modeling that data that you collect from the learner to be able to make estimates about the learner's state and also how's best to support them. So how does that look? So this is a screenshot out of a course that I did in OpenEdX. It was an introductory statistics course. And one of the ways we modified the then OpenEdX environment was to add the ability to give hints and feedback. Because we know that in the context of learning, learners need immediate targeted feedback. Let me ask you, finish this sentence. Practice makes, no. Practice makes permanent. Practice with context-specific targeted feedback and an opportunity to refine practice makes perfect. But that's kind of long to say. So you can just stick with practice makes perfect. Anyway, so this is an example of a pretty simple activity where a learner is labeling a box plot. And we give them both incorrect feedback, telling them, targeting when they might label something incorrectly, why, what we know, and also giving them correct feedback. So that's feedback to the learner. But that's feedback at a very specific point in time. The other thing that I built when I was at Stanford is an open analytics research system. And that used OpenEdX as the delivery environment and took the learner interactions. We built an event handler, which is openly available, and fed those learner interactions to our analytics system that would then model the learner's state and give that feedback to the learner and to the instructor. So I didn't have a great UI group there. So some of our representations were kind of hard for people to get. But basically, this was a representation that would predict for an instructor using the OpenEdX course, not completion. It was predicting mastery on different skills and outcomes. And it would tell you both how many activities the learner had done that was related to that outcome, as well as the predicted mastery state for that learner. This was another visual design that I had done when I was at Carnegie Mellon with the Open Learning Initiative. But it's the same idea, taking the learner interactions, working through the activities, modeling those activities, and giving feedback to, in this case, the instructor, so that they could use that information to better support the learners. This is essentially the same statistics course, and these were the 6 outcomes for that particular module. And over to the left, you see a prediction for the whole course. Green means most of the people in that class are getting that, could achieve that outcome. Yellow means they're still struggling. Red means they're not getting it at all. And gray means they haven't done enough activity for us to make a prediction. You could click into any of those and get very detailed levels about skills and about individual learners. But it's all the same idea of using the learner interactions to give actionable feedback to the actors in the system. Okay, and then this is back to the learning researchers. So this is another open source project, LearnSphere, that was a collaboration among MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, and Memphis. And this would be able to take OpenEdX and other data sets and run them through different modeling approaches in a WYSIWYG interface. So different researchers could take different data sets and make different claims. So that brings us to the science. So when I talk about the science of learning, which sciences do I mean? Well, the obvious ones are neuroscience, cognitive science, and then social psychological science. Now, when I was at Carnegie Mellon, I spent most of my time focused on cognitive science, and at Stanford, really turned my attention much more to the social psychological sciences and building infrastructures where you could both mitigate risks of stereotype threat or identity threat, and also collect data so that we could figure out when these different things were in play. And then obviously measurement science, because you can't just put up any activity, collect data from it, and make any kind of inference you want based on the click stream. You really need, it's kind of a garbage in, garbage out. That's why the upfront design of the learning experience is really important. So when you collect that data and do that creepy statistical modeling, the claims you're making about the learner's state or the effectiveness of the learning experience can be valid. And then, of course, ML and data science. That is what makes this all possible, frankly. Why? Because the dimensions of what we need to understand to truly differentiate instruction in a personalized way for any individual learner, the number of things you would have to account for in making a differentiation decision is too many. Because you really have to think about features about the learner, the human learner. Features about the thing that's being learned. And then features about the context in which the learning is occurring or in which the knowledge would be applied. And you have to consider the interaction among a diversity of all of those features to really make a reasoned instructional differentiation decision. And that's just too many dimensions for our little brains. But it's not too many dimensions for a lot of our new algorithms. So we have to find ways for the humans and the algorithms to work together to create a good learning experience. Because learning is really complex. Now, how many people here have been spent some time making instructional differentiation decisions, learning design stuff, like thinking about, and so often the choices you're making are seen as dichotomies. Like a really common one is when you're designing something, do you give someone like an activity that gives them more basic stuff, foundational stuff? Or do you give them more difficult stuff to build a better conceptual understanding? And people will argue viciously about which of these is better. Once you decide on one of those two things, then you have to decide, okay, like let's say I'm going to do more help with the basics. Then should I give focused practice, distributed practice, or gradually widen the practice? Once I decide that, then I have to say, okay, I'm going to give focused practice. What kind of practice? Am I going to give the user worked examples? Am I going to give them problems to solve? Am I going to do a 50-50 split between worked examples and problem solving? Then if I'm going to do problems, am I going to give them concrete problems, abstract problems, or a mix? Once I decide that, am I going to give them feedback as they're trying those problems? Am I going to give them immediate feedback, delayed feedback, or no feedback? Am I going to block the topics, interleave the topics, fade the topics? You get the point. It quickly gets exponential. And this was some work that was done by my colleague, Ken Gadinger at Carnegie Mellon, and a science article you might have read on instructional complexity. And so you can see that making these kinds of decisions on a moment-by-moment basis, a human really can't do effectively alone. Which brings us to the real power of the technology, which is we start with our current theory of human learning, our current understanding of how people learn. And we use that learning theory to engineer learning experiences. So we used to kind of just say, I think this looks right, so I'll just kind of throw that up there. But now we actually have a science in which we can embed our designs, which moves it from just a craft to a science and moves it to an engineering practice. So we engineer learning experiences, and then we use the technology to do what it does best: collect the data from the learner interactions. And we use those data to analyze the data, to create models. We then refine our learning theory and refine our models, and used our refined learning theory and refined models to once again re-engineer the learning experiences. And it is through this virtuous cycle that we will transform education. Thank you. So I left time for questions. I hope I said something provocative enough that someone will want to say something challenging and provocative.
Hello?
Hello?
Right here, right here.
I have no directional hearing.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
okay, how you doing? My name is Mike. I'm an educational provocateur. And so I'm going to ask a question. We're all, the Forbes says that personalized learning will be the thing for 2019, which is why we're here at Open edX. You made us, you gave us a couple of questions regarding interaction, technology, and stuff like that. We're all here for personalized learning. You asked us a question with 3 different blanks, didn't put us the fourth blank, and we all failed. You know, none of us raised our hands for none of the above. But we're here all for personalized learning. So the provocateur thing is, I don't think that question was phrased in an honest manner.
Okay. So how would you prefer I phrase it?
Yeah, I would have preferred probably a more one that we could have success with, because with success builds confidence. We then, with that confidence, can go out and teach others with the Socratic method and develop a mastery of the subject.
So that's interesting, because what we know is actually failure, confidence, success might breed confidence, failure breeds learning. So in fact, there's like, you can look, I can send you citations for a number of studies. An interesting one where people were watching YouTube videos where they were testing the efficacy of YouTube videos in teaching someone some skill. And they, I forget, I should know all the conditions, but basically one group, the control condition, just got to watch the YouTube video once or twice, and they did pre-test and post-test, and the other, the treatment condition, got to watch the YouTube video like 20 times. And then at the end of that sequence of activities, they asked both groups, you know, how confident are you that you could do whatever the skill was that you watched the how-to YouTube video to do? And they also did pre-test and post-test to measure actual gain in the skill or the knowledge. Between the groups that watched the YouTube video, didn't watch it at all, watched the YouTube video once, and watched the YouTube video 20 times, in terms of actual learning gain, no significant difference. However, in confidence, in belief that, yes, I know how to do that now, the group that watched the YouTube video multiple times had substantially and significantly more confidence. So you actually need to challenge your brain. If you just hear something and you're thinking, oh yeah, I know that, I got that, you're actually not building the cognitive structures you need to be building to be learning. So I intentionally gave you a multiple choice question where most of you would get it wrong, because then your brain kind of wakes up and goes, oh, wait, let me rethink that. So let me ask you, if I were going to give you that thing again, how many of you would vote differently? Let's see. How many of you think the power of this technology is access and convenience? Okay, that's great. You can still believe that. How many people think it's about simulation? Okay, how many people think it's about connection? How many of you would pick none of the above? Okay, great. Other questions? Yeah. Anyway,
Someone should hand microphones around.
Yeah, my name's Will.
Hi, Will.
Nice to see you here. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but we do all, I think, at least I do, have a question about creepy data, and you got Amazon attached to your name. So can you talk about who owns creepy data, and how about learners' access to creepy data? I've been thinking quite a bit recently, you know, a lot of people are wearing Fitbits and other other physical performance trackers. I'm thinking quite a bit about how we could try to make more of a performance tracker for knowledge or education. And that involves data. And companies like Amazon and Google and everybody else, they all are trying to get as much data as they can. And many people are worried about privacy and anonymizing that data. I'm sure you know a lot about that. Can you talk about it for a minute?
So I could talk about it in the abstract. Here's what I can say about what I am doing at Amazon. I'm the Director of Learning, Science, and Engineering. I am leading the global learning and development team to innovate and scale workplace learning for Amazon. So my focus is completely internal to Amazon. How do we build an effective ecosystem and learning experiences for Amazon so that workers at Amazon can continuously learn and grow and build their knowledge and skills. So I can't speak to at all, because I don't know any of Amazon's plans about collecting anybody else's data. But I will say in the abstract, and I feel comfortable doing this because I was talking about this for the years before I went to Amazon, is that the key is being able to find the interactions in the data, make patterns out of those interactions, and then figuring out how to interpret those patterns so that you can truly support differentiating instruction. And what I was screaming about I was certainly talking forcefully about for years when I was at Carnegie Mellon first and then at Stanford, is do not outsource that. Do not outsource that. We have the expertise, we have the knowledge, we have the students in not-for-profit higher education, and we have the mission that use of that data has to be aligned to. And I was getting really nervous about, as I'd go around the country talking with faculty at institutions of a diversity of Carnegie classifications. And I would hear them listening to vendors that would say, don't worry, use my product, it works. It knows how to personalize to your learner. Don't bother your pretty little head about how it does it, just trust me, it works. And what I was yelling to people is, that is alchemy, that is not science. And what we need is this needs to be driven by an interaction between practice and science. It needs to be open, and it needs to be driven by the people in this room. Now, in terms of, but that still doesn't solve the question of data. And we did, when I was at Stanford, we hosted a couple of symposia specifically around the responsible use of learner data. And I don't frame it as privacy. Frame it as responsible use of data. Why? Because there's a balance between a public good and an individual good. And it's the same kind of thing we have with public health. You know, your personal health information, you don't want to have it be out there being used for nefarious purposes. But if there's an epidemic, or if there's a big disease process, that having researchers having access to your personal health information could help society get past that problem more quickly, then you want to share that data. So really investing in how do we share data maximally for the benefit of the social good, for scientific purposes, while minimizing the risk to the individual actor. And I think that's going to be one of the big questions of this decade, how to do that effectively. I don't know if I answered your question. I don't think there is here's the answer. It is an answer that we should be actively trying to pursue.
Hi.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I've come from India. I'm Manisha. I teach in economics in Banaras in the university. while you were talking about the science of learning, you mentioned like social and psychological science. So I'm like more interested to know about that, psychoeconomics and socioeconomics is coming up in a big way. So how can we use this technology for like qualitative data?
Okay, great. So around the social psychology, if I had more time, I'd spend a lot more time talking about that. So part of my move from Carnegie Mellon to Stanford was at Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, there's a depth of expertise in cognitive science, especially sort of symbolic processing. And it is very robust, and it's necessary but not sufficient. So when I came to Stanford, I had a whole new group of colleagues that were doing a lot more work in the social psychological sciences, starting with my then dean, Claude Steele, whose work is in the area of stereotype threat. And that is, just in a nutshell, the idea is that if you are in a context in which you're learning, where some aspect of your identity is stereotyped, then your performance and your ability to learn will be substantially and significantly degraded. And he showed that over and over and over again, like with women mathematicians, with African American students in top-tier universities, so on and so forth. And what's interesting, don't get it confused with internalized stereotype. The individual does not believe the stereotype. Like, I'm a woman, I'm good at math, I know I'm good at math. Sitting in a context where everybody thinks I can't be good at math, I don't believe it. But the cognitive load of managing that threat in the air will degrade my performance in that context. So identity threat. So can we design environments that are attuned to a risk of identity threat and mitigate them? And a lot of my doctoral students at Stanford did a lot of work in this area. In fact, I'll bust myself, because when we did the statistics course, the probability and statistics course on Open edX in Stanford Online, about a month into it, launching it, one of my doctoral students said, Candace, are you aware that there are only 15% of your enrolled students, are women? 15%? Why? And he said, well, let's look at the icon you chose. So I had chosen this nice little blue background, said probability and statistics in that sort of computer font, that sort of data computer old type font. And it had like nice little waves on it. It looked very technical. And he said, let's do an experiment. Let's change that. And so we took that out, and he just found like a stock photo of a young woman with her back to the camera, with her feet up, with a computer on her lap. And on the screen was like a little histogram or something that looked statisticky. And then we also changed the introductory description. Instead of just starting with this course on probability and statistics, we changed that introduction to this intentionally, inclusively designed course on probability and statistics. And the rest was the same. And within a month, we had increased the percentage of women by another 20%. So just that tiny little indicator can have a huge consequence. So we should look at all of the learning experiences we're creating and inspect them consciously for, is there a message in there that you might not even be aware of that is signaling stereotype threat? There's also work in social belonging that my colleague Jeff Cohen was working on, and then also academic mindset work from my colleague Carol Dweck. And we were able to do some experiments with some of the growth mindset versus fixed mindset work, where, just in a nutshell, we did 2 versions of the statistics course that were being used at a community college. And one version of the course had a pre-module that was kind of like study strategies that we've had in the course forever. It just talked about how to use the course effectively. And then the other module, which was also called study strategies, but it was the treatment condition, was actually a mindset intervention. And again, we were able to see that even with and then we also did a couple booster interventions throughout the course. I mean, I can send you the paper. But just those small interventions actually changed the success rate and the learning gain for students in those courses. So looking at the cognitive is really critical, but looking at the social context and the social psychological is just as critical in the design. Thank you for that question. Yeah? I think there's a microphone coming.
Maybe one more question.
Oh, one more question. You want to bring a microphone? This man here in the middle.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joel from AD. Thank you for this interesting presentation. You are talking about the learner as a point to start, but I wonder what can we do to help learner to be much more motivated, as we could consider these point states a core difference between digital learning and learning on campus. Can you talk a little bit about, please?
I'm sorry, I could not hear the learner more about what? What was the word?
How can we help learner to be much more motivated and learning to be able to have much more capabilities?
Much more capabilities.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what we actually focus on when we're doing this knowledge modeling and collection. We're focusing on, for any of those large learning outcomes, what are the core knowledge and capabilities that the learner needs in order to be able to demonstrate that outcome. And so all of that data collection and modeling is specifically around observable capabilities. So what do we need to be able to support people to do that? You need to design a learning experience that's really clear about this is where you're trying to get to, these are what the capabilities are that you're trying to build, and then design the tasks that you're giving the learner to engage with, specifically to support their building those specific skills and knowledge, and then giving them practice with targeted feedback at the right point in time. There was an older learning researcher a long time ago by the name of Vygotsky, who talked about this thing called the zone of proximal development. And the idea there is that the best place to keep people in when they're learning is you give them a task to do that they can't do with their current state of knowledge and capabilities, but that they could do with a little bit of support. And then, and that's where you want to, and so that they fail, but then they have the opportunity to succeed and practice the success. And that's kind of the key. If you give them something that they can just do already, they'll get bored and won't engage. If you give them something that is too hard without the appropriate scaffolding, they'll get frustrated and give up. So my time's over. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks again to Candace for a great conversation involving us as students and our participants in that discussion, spanning higher ed, spanning corporate learning, research, practice, all those things. Super insightful, thank you. Next up, we have a panel coordinated by our very own Nina Huntman, who's the Senior Director of Academics and Research at edX, and I'll have her and the panel introduce themselves next. Thanks.
Make sure you turn your mics on. Hi, everyone. I'm Nina Huntman, as Marco said, Director of Academics and Research at edX, and I'm joined by a fantastic panel of brilliant and brave colleagues from some of the universities that are on edX.org. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves and a little bit about what they're doing at their institutions that is related to this conference. And then if each one of you could also describe briefly to the group a challenge that you're facing in this space of online learning at scale. So Paul, why don't you start?
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Walsh. I'm the program director for USMx. That's the University System of Maryland. And that's probably the challenge, is the systemness. We are 12 institutions, not one, so imagine trying to herd cats with a strategic plan for online learning that incorporates small schools, large schools, lovely small school by the beach, another one up by the mountains. We have HBCUs and Research One institutions. We have institutions that don't have very much of any online presence. And then we've got another like University of Maryland University College with 90,000 online students. So where each of them are heading and how we can support them both with some online strategic planning and with where we do work with edX and where Open edX might fit in with each of them is a guessing game. So that's one of my big challenges.
Hi, I'm Karen Flammer. I direct digital learning here at UC San Diego. Our campus currently supports about 90 MOOCs across Coursera and edX. On the edX platform, we have a couple MicroMasters, we have a professional certificate, and then we have a number of single courses. Our campus just stood up Open edX, so I'm looking forward to developing many more certificate programs and courses on that. The campus does not have, it only has a handful of credit-bearing online courses, and we currently don't have any online degrees. However, what's critical, I think, to some of this discussion is we have a very successful MicroMasters in data science, a credential program. That was, all of this for us was really an experiment in the MOOC space. But the successful experience with the MicroMaster in data science has led us to now partner with edX, pending lots of internal approvals on campus and University of California and whatnot, to launch a fully online degree in data science. And again, this will be our campus, the first online degree for our campus. So it's kind of an example of how experimentation has really stimulated innovation on our campus. We have a lot of challenges. I think a lot of challenges have been how to resource and support these credentialing programs, MOOC programs and courses, because they're not credit bearing. And so finding the equivalent of TA support, getting faculty to continuously engage when they're not getting teaching credit. We've developed some models, but that's been a challenge for us.
Hi, my name is Jim Hall. I'm the Dean of University Studies at Rochester Institute of Technology. We're a comprehensive polytechnic institute in Western New York, about 20,000 students. Experienced some pretty dramatic cultural change, I'd say, over the past 25 years. We used to be pretty intimately tied to local workforce development needs, particularly in computer science and in imaging, connected to the history of Rochester around Kodak and Xerox in particular. We've been with edX for 3 years now. We don't have any instance of Open edX. We run 2 MicroMasters programs in cybersecurity and project management. We have a professional certificate in soft skills, and we have some standalone X-Series courses in video game design and history. I'd capture our challenges being faculty knowledge and faculty capacity. We have a tendency to engage faculty when we need a major policy change, when we want them to approve something new programmatic to come along. But then we tend to leave them alone and not engage them, and they forget what we're up to, and they become see us as untrustworthy very quickly. They have a legitimate interest in their own, in the future of their own labor, and so we need to do a better job of explaining to them in an ongoing way what it is that we're trying to do.
Great, thanks. So each of you in your introduction touched upon a lot of the points I'd like to dive into deeper. And as well, I'm hoping that the audience will think about questions that they have. We may not save them to the end. We may just pull from the audience if there's something that we think you have some reflection about, as well as if if folks here on the stage would like to hear perhaps what you think about some of the things that come up. So I'd like to start with sustainable practice. Each of your organizations have been involved in the MOOC space for a while now, and I'm curious to know how you've had to change or add the capacity and the capabilities of your teams. Whether that's the kinds of job descriptions you're writing today that you weren't writing 5 years ago, the size of the teams, and perhaps how you've managed, maybe with struggles, sure, to get the resources for those teams. Paul, I know there's been quite a bit of change in the UCM system, so perhaps you could address this first.
So I have a few instructional designers who we plug into different course teams throughout the state. So those designers have expertise, and edX have expertise, of course, in instructional design, and then plug into a local course team that maybe hasn't used edX much, or maybe not at all, hasn't done anything at scale, and already has their other full-time job. So you can imagine, that's a really difficult relationship to manage. What I see evolving over time is that the role of the instructional designer, and I know there are a lot of you here, the role of the developer is changing a good bit. You're expected to be now a data scientist. You're expected to be a project manager all at the same time, because now you're not just working one-on-one. Back in the day when I came up, as a faculty member, as an instructional designer, you were knee to knee with the faculty member, creating a course together. Now you're on a course team. Now there are deliverables and contingency plans and Gantt charts. And that's a really alien world for a lot of our faculty who bristle when it comes to deadlines and deliverables, because they've got their full-time job still as well. We haven't quite nailed down with 12 institutions how each faculty member is compensated, or do they get a release, do they get money, do they get share revenue for their work on edX, and who ultimately is running the course. Is it the faculty member, is it the designer, is it somebody else, is it a dean? So we're still trying to figure out all of that, and adding edX to the kind of the evolution of instructional design has only made this more interesting and more of a challenge.
Karen, can you answer the question of who's running the course?
So, again, 90 MOOCs, these, micro-credential programs, it's grown organically. I have built a team of undergraduate students that have been really the acting as, I also have instructional designers, but again, for these non-credit bearing programs, this team of undergraduate students, and of course undergraduates, are only around for 4 years and then they move on. So I continuously am training new ones, but they act as course builders. They now are experts on Coursera, edX, our own LMS system, Canvas. They sometimes act as the product manager for the deadlines. They develop very close relationships with the faculty that are leading these courses. And it's really been a model that has allowed us to scale. But we're at a critical point right now, especially now that we're kind of on the verge of having one of our MicroMasters be credit bearing for potentially a master's degree. What I've struggled with is, these undergraduates, they're not TAs. They're not the traditional graduate student TAs. They're not compensated as that. They don't always have the content knowledge to be monitoring the courses now that are going to be part of a graduate level program. So we're in a shift now with, again, how we're going to kind of allocate resources a little bit differently once these micro-credentials actually become part of a full degree program. But it's really the model for the undergraduate interns that has allowed us to scale as we've scaled.
So I'd like to ask a few questions about running a non-credit bearing program inside of institutions that are almost wholly focused on credentialing credit bearing programs. So if you could share maybe some success stories. I know each of you have worked really hard to get to move through your institution's processes to get some of these non-credit bearing credentials out the door and to the world. Perhaps you can share a successful path, or at least some advice for those who might be doing the same on their campuses. Jim?
Well, frankly, the non-credit space has been easier for us to build quickly and to get out the door. Less faculty anxiety, less institutional anxiety about how we're measuring credit, how we're going to engage our creditors on that front. I think it's been, for our university communications team, a pretty steady flow of the kinds of success stories that Anant was sharing this morning. It's also been about brand extension. It's been about telling the community that we're looking for students that are eventually going to come to us in a more traditional way or come to our regular online space. We're still stuck with some fundamental capacity issues. There are faculty members who would like to build non-credit vehicles, but don't have the time, don't have the workload room to make it happen. So we could be doing more. We could be engaging with Open edX, most certainly more than we do currently. But we've been pretty deliberate, I think, about what we've put out into the world. And some of it is floating something, seeing if it gets traction, and coming back to it and thinking about how we can put it to some other purpose.
Karen, I know you're, oh, I'll go ahead if you have a
I was just going to add a quick story. University of Maryland School of Business, the Smith School, faculty meeting as they're really deciding whether or not to pull the trigger on a MicroMasters. A lot of back and forth between faculty members when one faculty member finally says, it's not a question of how can we afford to do this, it's a question of how can we afford not to. And the whole conversation pivoted and they wrapped it up in a few minutes.
Pocket that question, plant it in the audience, and there you go. Great. Here.
So again, as I mentioned, just partnering with these platform providers and developing these MOOCs and these MOOC programs. There's been, it's been pockets of faculty, mainly I'd say in our computer science and our data science, departments that have had interest. But the idea to actually, that grew out of the success of the MicroMasters, and it's not just of the data science MicroMasters, it's not just the success, it's the experience that the faculty have had developing it and seeing the uptake in the students that have taken this and just seeing the feedback that they've gotten. It's the fact that these faculty also travel a lot around the world to conferences and they get stopped in airports, saying, we recognize you, I took that, I took that course in probability and statistics, on edX and all that. So certainly the brand recognition, but this is really what has, internally, again, led to the interest in developing potentially our first fully online master's degree, was the experience that the faculty had with not getting any teaching credit, yes, kind of like struggling with resource allocation to support this program, but it was the experience in developing it and delivering it and seeing the benefit that learners were getting out of this program that has really, stimulated further interest in online education and innovating in terms of a degree.
I think we often think about as Anant described in his opening remarks, the learner is very different than the learner of 40 years ago or even 20 years ago. But each one of your campuses have been engaged in that non-traditional learner, that's becoming the traditional learner, for many years. But it seems to me, at least from the outside, that there's a tipping point where now there's an understanding that that professional learner is a significant, not just a side project, not just like an also and, like we additive to what but is infiltrating the thinking about the mission of the university. And certainly UMUC, part of the USM system, has had that focused for a while. Could you provide some insight, perhaps, maybe I'm totally off, but is that non-traditional learner now really
the center of how some of your programs and your faculty and your administration are thinking about the mission of the institution, transforming it perhaps. Jim?
Yes. I think we've been trying to prepare the institution for a different set of learner relationships that are more casual, perhaps short-term. This is not an easy transition to pull off, particularly we're a relatively young institution. We're somewhat obsessed with building sustainable relationships with alums that we hope will give back to the institution. So on the one hand, some of the data that we put out there is eye-popping for the campus, for a campus that typically delivers courses that have 15 to 150 learners in a classroom, to be reporting out to faculty and, for that matter, to senior leadership that you're enrolling 40, 50, 60,000 folks in a learning environment is exciting. But we also set ourselves up for some unreasonable expectations, too, when we do that as well. So I think we're really early in the game in terms of telling the story, what it means to have shorter-term relationships with learners who now know the brand in ways in which perhaps they didn't before, and play parts of the world that we weren't before. But it's not obvious yet what this new set of relationships has to do with our overall business strategy as to how to become a sustainable institution.
Paul, do you want to respond to that?
Certainly the non-traditional students always been of interest to an institution like UMUC, as you mentioned. But I'll tell a tale out of school a little bit, if we all keep it secret. There was concern with, are we going to be stealing from our own enrollment? UMUC has an international presence, and there was concern that as they rolled out 5 MicroMasters, that they'd be seeing a decline. So after, let's say 6 months or so, as we neared the 100,000 learner mark, I stood up the list of edX learners against their own learners. Anybody that had ever been in the UMUC pipeline for the last, let's say, 10 years. And the edX learners were 98.2% never seen in the UMUC data. Did that quell the question of whether they were stealing from their own enrollment? No. But it was still a telling statistic, and it helped us say that this is a different audience of adult learners, a different audience of non-traditional learners that we should still pursue.
So we touched a little bit about sustainable practice and a bit about how credentials are disrupting some of what you've done traditionally at your universities. I'd like to move to digital learning. So as you know, the audience here at Open edX is filled with educators and technologists. And I think it would be of interest to the group to hear from the three of you as you've launched and scaled your educational offerings. How have you thought about the learning you're building in these spaces? That can be anything from building authentic assessments that are going to be recognized for credit that might be different than your professionally oriented programs that's not as important. So from a digital learning design perspective, what are some of the things you can offer the audience that you've seen and done? Jim?
I think the disciplinary specialists that have had the greatest hands-on role in building some of these structures have taken real pleasure in meditating on the question of what it means to do learning at this kind of scale. I think the larger challenge remains with our faculty community as a whole, who, whenever we engage our sense of what the opportunities might be in this space, want to draw a distinction between what they call training and what they think of as being education. And oftentimes the conversation I'm locked into with a faculty member is, all of these things produce short-term useful skills in an employment market, but do they really produce wisdom? And aren't we in the wisdom business? And I both want to ask folks to hold off on that question to some degree. But I also want to take it really seriously. I think I think it's key to getting at faculty anxiety around their own labor. It's key to getting at faculty anxiety around what the future of our physical plant is. We certainly we engage at the level of boards of trustees an enthusiasm for these experiments because they see it as a potential panacea to all of our revenue challenges. So this issue of what constitutes authentic assessment in this space is really intriguing to me, and figuring out ways to continually meditate on this distinction that faculty want to draw between learning and education, I think is worthwhile.
Karen, that distinction between wisdom and training, does it need to be a dichotomy? Are there ways in which we're in fact perhaps changing that?
So I think our campus is realizing that a lot of our graduates of our degrees, whether they're in engineering, computer science, and some of the real applied fields, there still is potentially a gap between the knowledge and skills that they need in the workforce. And so I think as much as, for a very long time, our faculty, our campus is going to hold on to the idea of the traditional degree, being the proxy of wisdom and all that. I think there's a recognition now and a kind of a trend towards recognizing that supplementing that degree with micro-credentials and more skill-based training is necessary. And again, whether the two sets of learners are totally separate, whether it's the professional learners that are taking all our credentialing programs, and that's very different than our traditional students. I think now that is the case, but I think that our own students, our own traditional on-ground students, will benefit from the increments of knowledge that we create online for these credentialing programs. So, my big prediction is in 5 years, there is going to be more of a blending. This whole thing now, I call them learning workers, right? Learning workers, knowing that anyone now that goes into a profession is going to have to skill and reskill and upskill in the future. That is just the nature of this ever-changing workforce. And the university's role is to produce people. Not everybody stays in academia, right? There's not enough jobs in academia, even if you get a PhD, is to be producing students that can go out in this ever-changing workforce. And in my mind, these micro-credentials and these programs are really the key for that, to blend that with traditional learning.
So I'd like to open it up to the audience to ask questions. Time flies by really quickly up here, doesn't it? So if those who have the mic runners could help me with that. And as you're thinking about questions, I know in our call before to talk about what we would talk about today, my colleagues up here are interested in the kinds of communities of practice and capabilities that you've been building. So questions, yes, but some brief insights to offer back up on stage is also appreciated. Mic runners? Or are we out of mics? Because we've got them. Oh, you've got, okay, good. Get some folks down the front. Okay, great.
Throw our mics.
Yeah, I like the idea of using undergraduate students. We at IIT Bombay have used them effectively as teaching assistants. They have very high energy levels. However, what I wish to know is from which source of fund do you support them, and what kind of internship do you pay them? To sustain the whole effort, you'll need to do that, right? Use of undergraduate students for your activities as course designers.
So which sources of funding for TAs can you use?
So I use the funds that come out of the revenue from our MOOC programs. I reinvest in the undergraduate intern program. They're paid probably higher than more per hour than they get in most on-campus jobs. But more than that, it has been transformative for some of these interns. 2 of them graduating with undergrad degrees in cognitive science have now decided that they want to go get masters in instructional design. Wow. Based on their experience in working with faculty and understanding course designs and some learning theories and pedagogy. So it's really been, they're paid internships, but in my mind, they're getting a very unique undergraduate experience to supplement, their other studies.
They could start with an instructional design micromasters.
Yes, exactly. I've told them about that.
I have one more question to the numbers that you mentioned, that there is a concern in existing universities that their enrollment may go down if there are too many online courses. And you proved correctly that more than 95% or whatever were new people. We have a similar problem of scale in India. We have only about 30 million students engaged in higher education, and we wish to get this number to 60 million in next 5 years, which means all these 30 million people will be new people completely. And yet we find that institutions are concerned about giving a degree using MOOCs. They don't mind people doing some credits and so on. So is there any real answer that can be given to all institutions?
So is there fear that they are going to replace the current students with additional, or is it the quality? What can you pinpoint what the concern is about?
No, they are concerned about the current enrollment being taken.
Okay.
In our case, I would say there is a lack of knowledge top to bottom about the work we do in online spaces already. So we deliver probably 30 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs in fully online spaces. I would say the vast majority of our community is unaware of that. So again, there's a perception that that we're cannibalizing things. I think there's also just again still some discomfort about what it means to deliver education at the kinds of scale that we're talking about. And again, I'm back at this question of how we perpetually interpret what we do for faculty communities, for administrative communities. It's a challenge.
So I have a brief, but is this on? Over here, James. This is actually meant for James Hall in particular. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm pulling this out of an old brain cell, but Rochester Institute of Technology is somehow connected to a deaf community? Yes. Or deaf learning. So I'm particularly interested because technology has had a major impact, particularly texting, on communication among that community. So I'm wondering, have you done any MOOC work with that community? And aside from captioning, are there other things we can do that improve their learning experiences? Because certainly traditional education in a classroom doesn't take them very far.
So RIT is home to the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, which is one of 2 institutions in the country, along with Gallaudet University in DC, that's focused on deaf education. We have internal data in terms of the ways in which deaf students participate in our regular online classes, and they most certainly gravitate towards them, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes I think for not so good reasons, just hesitancy to participate in alternative communication practice in the classroom. We've not had any conversation at all. I mean, I think except in a kind of utopian way, wouldn't it be a terrific thing for RIT to do to take kind of international leadership in the MOOC space to be reflecting on these questions? I think we have, I think our instructional designers have done some terrific work in educating edX staff about what the needs of deaf learners might be, and I think that's had some positive impacts. A lot of the things that we've had to work on in terms of captioning and transcripting are kind of second nature to us because we do it in every single class that we deliver in both the face-to-face and online space. This would be, if there's somebody in the Open edX community that would be interested in taking up this question, we could certainly find you conversation partners at RIT.
So I was only going to respond to one thing, but now I'll respond to both. My name's Steve Jacobs. I'm at RIT with Jim. And I wanted to first address the kind of question about TAs and budgets and all that kinds of things. When we did our first X series, one of the models that we put together was that since I was the instructor for the first one in leading the development of the other classes, we used a response model where we hired our undergrad TAs to essentially surf the comments and then highlight to me the stuff that were either really significant comments in terms of quality or topics that were trending. And then I would respond twice a week, like Tuesday, Thursday. And then every Sunday, I'd post a summary of what had been going on in the week, since people don't always follow the normal sequence. And that seemed to work well in terms of budget and man hours and things like that. In terms of deafness, I worked my way through school as a sign language interpreter, and I taught at NTID before I taught at RIT. Very quickly, additional things you can do to benefit the hearing impaired communities are additional vocabulary support, right? Textual. If you've got the money and the time, which unfortunately most people don't invest, taking those transcripts and providing a sign language version of those is something that would help, but it's very time and cost intensive. So you have to make sure you want to put that effort in. And I could talk about stuff like that for a really long time, so anyone who's interested, I've got the last session on Thursday, I think, so if you want to meet in the break time before that just to touch base, we can do that.
Do we have any more in the middle? Someone who maybe hasn't asked a question?
Ready?
One in the middle, and then we'll come down front.
So it was just a follow-up to the prior question. Are you guys having any efforts at achieving parity between the micro master's program and the traditional master's program? Are there efforts to attain parity between the two?
We insist that there's absolute parity between them, that the learning that takes place in the micromaster's piece is that part of what we're guaranteeing to our own academic communities and to our accreditors is it's the same work. In terms of, do you mean external perception of parity? Yeah, well, that's the million-dollar question. We're hopeful that employers will begin to pick up on the credential and see its value. We are, certainly my own program, part of the way in which we are trying to act distinctively in the edX community is we've been essentially aggregating anybody's MicroMasters into professional master's degree programs at ours. We have a great partnership with UCSD around data science, but we've signed articulation deals with Harvard, with Berkeley, with the University of British Columbia. So we're trying to figure out how to treat them as a kind of currency and to move them just as easy as we would move any other credit. If anything, I would say we have more articulation, more fluidity in moving MicroMasters graduate credit than we do in moving regular credit.
Hello, thank you. Quick question about just, this seems like a closed loop environment still. We're talking about credential degrees or micro degrees within degrees. To what extent are your systems, being large public institutions focused on educating an entire region, working with either industry to sort of create some sort of articulation where alumni after graduation have a reason to come back for continued education, and or increasing avenues for undergraduates to have more flexible opportunities of professionals that sort of go off from your institutions that might have something to offer into these programmings from a real world experience, can sort of help bridge that question of, do we offer wisdom and practical knowledge to something that's actually kind of answers both?
So it's something that is a big concern of ours, and with some of our specializations that we've developed, we've actually partnered with industry partners. In fact, some of the industry partners have actually funded the development of some of our specializations for that purpose, for the purpose, and usually and a couple of them, what we've done is in the final capstone project, if we try to choose some of the top capstone projects, and then we put those students in touch with the industry partner that has sponsored that micro-credential. I'd really like to be doing more of that, and I think it's of particular importance because in so many of these areas, like big data and data science, the technologies and the products are changing so rapidly that means that these credentials, these specializations have to be, every few years we have to update them, again, to keep up with the changes in the workforce. So it's something that we've done some of, linking more with the industry needs, and I hope to do more of it. It is, again, it's kind of a question of resources to be able to have that be a priority.
So we're at time. I'm told down the front we're at time, unfortunately. Before I say goodbye to this panel, Karen, Jim, and Paul have asked me to remind folks in the room that if you're part of the MicroMasters community of practice, that they're going to meet with you essentially over lunch, and you can sort of gather over in this corner. So if you could please join me in thanking Paul, Jim, and Karen for their time and their insight.
All right, thanks again to the panel. One last small session here. I think Dan told me it was going to be 35 minutes long or something, but before lunch. So just a quick word from our lunch sponsor today, Pearson. And as a means of sort of introduction, an interesting journey to highlight, Dan Davis will be coming on stage. First joined the edX community in 2013, I believe, working with Georgetown on their early MOOC learner analytics. Went on to get his PhD at TU Delft, also an edX member, focusing again on sort of analytics at scale. Was also a member of the edX data science team this past year, and has now moved on to support, from a learning analytics and product management standpoint, the efforts at Pearson X. So, welcome, Dan Davis.
Thank you, Marco. We good? Oh, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Davis, as Marco said. First, I wanted to thank the Open edX team for putting this event on. We're all really happy to be here. And also, I just want to thank edX for just being awesome and continuing to support this project, the Open edX initiative specifically. It's very near and dear to me, like Marco said, from my early days at Georgetown, to my PhD at Delft, to my time at edX, and now here at Pearson. I've been in this edX bubble for a while now, and I couldn't be happier. But yeah, I'll be very quick, because don't look now, but lunch is literally right behind you all. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's that Pearson is interested in creating products and services to drive learner engagement and completion of courses. Very simple. Products and services, engagement and completion. And we plan to do that with these 3 bullet points. The first being collaboration. We deeply believe in this Open edX community, and we want to continue to build the capacity for this community going forward. It's an amazing, vibrant community, loaded with talented people from designers, developers, innovative thinkers, everywhere in between. It's really flush with talented people, and at Pearson we just want to continue to fuel that and keep pushing forward as much as we can. In terms of products and services, this is probably what Pearson is most well known for, specifically the marketing and recruitment side of things. But what I want to do here is echo what both Ned and Adam said earlier about making edX the best, most powerful, and I want to stress most effective learning platform in the world. Operative word being effective. We want to move towards strictly thinking about things in terms of learning outcomes. And that was really the focus of my PhD at Delft. I did a lot of experiments in MOOCs running A/B tests. I would create an intervention or a system and evaluate the extent to which that affected learner outcomes and engagement. And luckily, I'm fortunate to be able to continue that work here at Pearson as well. And third bullet for data and analytics shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who knows me, but I'm really trying to spread the gospel of the data product. And I first learned about this when I was at edX. I learned it from Trev, who's head of data science at edX. And the idea behind a data product is that everything you do in product development, every product decision, should be driven by data. And what some people call creepy analytics, I call learning analytics. And that's really what I believe in. And our product decisions going forward are going to be informed by my background in large-scale learning analytics. And another point with data that I really like to make is that we can use new products to get new data. So oftentimes, at least in the research community, I know people get stuck in the edX log data, for example. But the cool thing about being able to create new products is that new products make new data that add more color to the learner experience. And we can learn a lot from the data created by new products. And lastly, just a few call-outs. Keep an eye out for Pearson badges. There's a Pearson booth. Come talk to us. We're really curious about what you're curious about and working on. And chances are the person you talk to will be friendly. No guarantees, but there's a good chance. And just two shameless plugs. I'm giving a talk tomorrow at 3:45 about real-time analytics in the OpenEdX platform. And also, I encourage you all to come to the aquarium later tonight for the reception. And that's all I got. I'll hand it back to Marco.
All right, so minor logistics note, we'll be back in the other building for the sessions after lunch, but at 1 o'clock. But I believe we're good to go on lunch. Is that right? Everyone can mob it all at the same time, I'm sure? No. But anyways, so thanks everyone.